This meeting is streaming live on Facebook.
Hi, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well this evening. This is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour, and I am coming to you from Jojage, which has long been a meeting place of various First Nations, otherwise known as Montreal. And we have a special guest tonight, Tamara Lorincz, coming to us from Vienna, and an important summit on peace in Ukraine. So that will be coming up in the latter half. So I'll get right to some of the developments in Canadian foreign policy. Again, this is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour every Monday night, 6 p.m. Eastern. I think we're now up to about 60 or 65 or so weeks of this. And please do spread the word to friends or others who might be interested in participating in this discussion. So a couple days ago, the Al Jazeera reported on indigenous protesters in Peru seizing the vessels of a Canadian oil company, Petrotal. It's unclear exactly where that's going, but they have apparently seized the vessels. So hopefully there'll be more information on that coming days. The Financial Times reported a couple days ago that, quote, Canada's trade minister, local ambassador, and mining executives have also expressed concerns to Mexico's economy minister about the mining reforms, the modest, nationalistic, ecologically minded reforms that the AMLO government in Mexico have pursued. And the Financial Times basically just reported on how Canadian companies and officials are working aggressively against that. Today, the National Post, or I guess it was a Canadian Press article, has another article about Canada-Mexico, talks again about how Canada is working to oppose these mining reforms in Mexico. Today, I had the opportunity to meet up with our international trade minister, Mary Ng, at a big corporate affair. And just after her, she spoke to a corporate audience, and this is.
Apologize to the communities destroyed by Canadian mining companies that you've noted around the world, like indigenous communities and destroyed by Canadian mining companies, because you've opposed the non-personal credits to the strength to rename Canadian mining companies. Two things. You got the first but the first one is just we support our market. And I expect Canadian companies all around the world to have create responsible business practices. And that's my expectation. Canada is a brand around the world, and I expect Canadian companies to really do their accountable. Apologize to the communities destroyed by Canadian mining companies.
So that was the minister that I talked to today. She's been aggressively lobbying against against the mining reforms in Mexico, and I think I did quite a poor job of intervening. So they didn't really work out that well in terms of getting her on the spot. I think I should have just ended with that question about do you want to apologize to communities that have been destroyed? Because the reality is that she hasn't just opposed the promised ombudsperson. Much more than that, she's been running all around the world promoting Canadian mining companies. And I have to say that, like, when I found out that she was speaking in Montreal today, it didn't even come to mind right away that she's the person in charge of the file first of all, the ombudsperson, and secondly, promoting mining companies. I've of course written about her a little bit, but I'm actually a little embarrassed to say that it didn't come to my mind right away about how aggressive she has been in promoting mining companies. And I think that's somewhat reflective of the fact that we've done a really poor job. Like, there's these NGOs, there's different social civil society groups that are focused on mining reform and getting a proper ombudsperson. But I really feel like we haven't really brought the heat against the minister. And even though she is really the person, and I think it's just, unfortunately, reflective of the fact that we are being way too, I don't know if you like, too respectful in our politics around the whole mining question, which is an incredibly important question to Canadian foreign policy. It's just egregious what Canadian mining companies do around the world, and what the Canadian government, with Minister Ng right at the forefront, does in pushing.
Yeah, I'll wait. Thank you, sweetheart.
Apologies. I think there's some people who try to make sure that you're muted. I thought I tried to keep people muted, but so the Maple has a story titled "Majority of Canada's non-US military exports go to anti-democratic regimes," and basically shows that just Canada's arms sales, mostly it's going to Saudi Arabia, but a number of other Middle East monarchies. And that puts their whole sort of like, human rights kind of moralizing perspective into a little bit of a different lens. So the Senate, Canada's Senate, a couple of days ago, passed a non-binding resolution to declare Iran's Revolutionary Guard a terrorist organization. So it's always really important to contrast our policy towards Saudi Arabia and Iran. So we're going after Iran in so many different ways. And, at one level, legitimately, there's lots to, dislike about the Iranian government. But then on the other hand, we're sending arms to the Saudis. And it's pretty hard to fit those two things together and not come to the conclusion that this is about geopolitics. It's not about, is Iran repressive in general, repressive towards women, but rather it's part of a bigger geopolitical kind of game. The Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East today reported that Canada delivered more than $21 million, sold more than $21 million in weapons to Israel last year, even though Israel is killing tons of Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza. On the 14th, Naftali Bennett, the former Israeli prime minister, there's a campaign going after Bennett to not bar him from Canada. There's still a chance that might happen. Word is that the Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center, who is having him speak on June 14th in Toronto, they got lawyers onto the case. There's this whole legal effort going after him. And so it's clearly scaring the Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center. And there's been a pretty good amount of media attention. If he isn't barred from coming in, there will be a protest in Toronto, I believe starting at 6 p.m. in front of the venue on the 14th. And tomorrow afternoon, there's a webinar explaining why he should be barred from Canada. There's a campaign that was, and there's also, I should say, an effort to bring him to, a lawyer submitted a file to the International Criminal Court to call on Canada to arrest him if he is allowed into Canada. So another sort of legal maneuver to make his life and Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center's life difficult. There's a campaign that was instigated in recent days, calling on Scotiabank from, I think mostly from BDS Canada, Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions Canada, calling on Scotiabank to divest from Israeli arms firm Elbit Systems. They have more than $500 million invested in that, the biggest Israeli arms company that had been tons of campaigning around that. And it's really egregious that Scotiabank has so much money invested in this company that it goes way beyond the small amounts that they would have just based upon sort of general investing. And it appears there's people in this Scotiabank staff that are actually real strong proponents of the Israeli arms industry as as was reported on a few weeks ago. In response to Israel's murder of 2-year-old Palestinian Mohammed Tamimi, the Canadian government statement, the Ramallah office put out a statement saying, quote, "Canada is deeply saddened by the death of 2-year-old Mohammed Tamimi, who was critically injured by Israeli security forces in Al-Nabi Saleh a few days ago. Children and civilians must be protected under all circumstances. The ongoing investigation must ensure accountability." So this is just a kind of nothing statement about this horrible incident. It looks like this was possibly even a explicit, basically a planned assassination, because there was no fighting going on. The Israelis, of course, have very high level snipers. It was just a little 2-year-old with her father his father in a car. A couple days ago, maybe on Friday, there was the unveiling or the launching of the new Toronto Holocaust Museum. Doug Ford, the premier, was there. The federal government put up $3 million for it. Doug Ford announced $500,000 for it. What was remarkable about seeing the image for this was that Doug Ford spoke in front of a Canadian flag and a what flag at the Holocaust Museum? An Israeli flag. So this is how much, I've talked about the Holocaust industry. I had Norman Finkelstein on previously, and obviously we know what the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance anti-Palestinian definition, anti-Semitism is used to try to attack the pro-Palestinian movement. But this is how far down the Nazi Holocaust and the horrors that were perpetrated against European Jewry, how far down the path of tying it to Palestinian dispossession and apartheid. When they launch the new Holocaust Museum, funded in significant part by Canadian taxpayers, Ontario taxpayers, they have an Israeli flag there, and it's quite an odious to see this dynamic at play. So
Mr. Housefather, you're a total hypocrite to talk about minority rights. In Israel, as head of the Israel Parliamentary Committee meeting, you support a whole host of supremacist laws in Israel. You at least condemn Israel's murder of 2-year-old Palestinians. Palestinian Tamimi, you at least condemn that. You condemn the murder. You condemn the murder. You condemn the murder. Mr. Housefather, you're a total hypocrite to talk about minority rights. In Israel,
So that was on Saturday. That's the head of the Canada-Israel Interparliamentary Group, Anthony Housefather, challenging him at a conference on minority language rights, English language rights here in Quebec. And it's just striking to see the contrast between, being opposed to the majority linguistic imposing on English language rights, and then being supporting of supremacist policies in Israel. And quite frankly, Housefather is someone who would never accept the kind of racist laws in Quebec that he accepts and promotes in Israel. And it's really important to point out that kind of double standard. Now, of course, as everyone knows, David Johnston, the special rapporteur on foreign interference, he resigned late Friday after just a total assault against him for multiple weeks, after releasing the report saying, basically pouring cold water on the claims of the extremists, some of the extreme claims of foreign interference, Chinese interference in Canada. I think it's very unfortunate he resigned. His report was really important, pushback against this total scaremongering absurdity around, China's destroying our democracy, etc. China's, all powerful in Canada, etc. So it's really troubling to see that he resigned, but that's where the media assault and the political parties, and you got to put a lot of the blame on this on the NDP, has just completely bought into this China interference kind of deal. On the flip side, on a maybe a more positive note, Sam Cooper, one of the three main journalists, the Global News reporter who was really pushing the whole Chinese interference, he left Global News. And when he left, the Global put out a statement saying that the Global got sued for his allegations against Han Dong, the Liberal MP, as having worked to keep the two Michaels in jail. And there's a couple other lawsuits against Global for some of Cooper's reporting. And they released a statement saying that their reports weren't, quote, presented as factual findings. So now they're not taking it down, but they're saying this wasn't presented as factual findings. I'm not sure what kind of findings it was presented as, but so there's, this Chinese interference issue keeps going back and forth. Andrew Mikovica has a very good piece in Al Jazeera titled "Canadian Democracy is on Edge, and China Isn't to Blame." And he basically talks about presenting to Parliament and how the MPs are just like completely out of control. They're just their questions, their political grandstanding, their China is this and that. The just a total chorus of like whipping up this frenzy around China that as Mitrovica has pointed out is based upon these allegations from an intelligence agency that has a long history of lying at the service of the US empire. And of course, the US empire is all about target China right now. There was a post on switching gears to the final subject before getting to our guest. There was a post on Twitter of a clip from Victoria Nuland, a top US Ukraine official from 2016, where she told Congress that the US has advisors in 12 Ukrainian ministries. US trained police operate in 18 Ukrainian cities. The US Treasury helped close 60 Ukrainian banks while protecting depositors. The US spent $266 million on training Ukrainian soldiers. So that's back in 2016. And that speaks to how post-Maidan, after Viktor Yanukovych was ousted, the elected president, Ukraine really became a colony of the US, Canada, and other Western countries. And I've written about the Canadian police. We talk a lot about Operation Unifier training the Ukrainian military, but the Ukrainian police, Canada was right at the part of recreating a new Ukrainian police after Yanukovych was ousted. And I would almost guarantee you, and I know I've seen some stuff about Canadians within the different ministries, but I have never seen a full kind of analysis of just how many Canadian representatives were in the different Ukrainian ministries. And I would almost guarantee you that it tracks very closely with the US, right? So there was Canadian advisors all throughout the government. Obviously, we know that on the military domain. I've detailed it in the policing domain, but I guarantee you that goes all throughout the Ukrainian government. Now, in the Globe and Mail today, on the front page of the Globe and Mail, Mark McKinnon, who's been the Globe and Mail correspondent there for, off and on for basically 2 decades. He has this piece called, with call to protect press freedom, Trudeau reaffirms Canada's historic role in Ukraine during visit. This is a absolutely contradictory piece. Part of it is about the fact that the Ukrainians have refused to grant the visa, reapply, or grant the reapplication for the visa for the Ukrainian, a photographer the Globe Mail's been working with for 10 years. Okay, and they've pursued questions about his family. They're basically implying that his photos are contrary to national, he's basically working with the Russians. That's what the Ukrainians are implying about the Globe Mail's photographer. So that was brought up by he was asked, Trudeau was asked about it by the Globe and Mail. Globe and Mail had it on the front page, I think on Thursday or Wednesday or Thursday or Friday of last week. And so this piece by McKinnon, who knows the story, he wrote a book about Canada's role in the colored revolutions back in 2004, in the early 2000s in different countries in Eastern Europe. He knows the file. So in this piece, McKinnon goes through some of this really important history, Canada's role in the Orange Revolution in 2004, a bit about Canada's role in ousting Yanukovych in 2014, a bit about Canada's role in the police post-Yanukovych, but it's all this like totally contradictory. It's like all of what Canada's trying to do is just bring democracy to Ukraine. But he's also pointing out that right now there is no democracy in Ukraine because it's martial law, and the security services are just like, blocking journalists or photographers that are viewed as, possibly pro-Russian, even though they've been operating for 10 years, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just like sort of he's pushing some of like the context that's important, while simultaneously just pushing the sort of propaganda line about this war is all about democracy, but then also backing away from that and stuff like that. So it's quite a fascinating piece, and it says a lot about the state of the media discussion on this issue in Canada today. There was also an article about that I was not aware about it, titled "Meet the Private Canadian Instructors Training Ukraine's Assault Troops." So about a Canadian who set up a private training company, a former Canadian soldier set up a private training company working with the Ukrainian military. That's obviously alongside Operation Unifier. Now, Trudeau, of course, was in Kyiv. I think it was on Sunday, maybe it was Saturday. And he announced a whole bunch of things. He announced that $500 million more in I think mostly in weaponry, going to be sent. They announced that we're going to be training Ukrainian pilots on the F-16, enhancing and extending Operation Unifier training mission. More ammunition, some rockets, etc. And not all the details have been released. He also announced that a Russian cargo jet that's at Pearson Airport in Toronto, they've seized it, and their plan is to give it to the Ukrainians. Okay, so that's a big step where they're actually taking Russian assets and giving it to the Ukrainians. So that's further escalation of the whole sanctions campaign. Now, he also said that we're pushing basically for Ukraine to join NATO, that Canada is supportive of Ukraine joining NATO. He said, quote, "We're very much a live conversation, and Canada and many others are very supportive of Ukraine joining NATO when the conditions allow." What that exactly looks like is a conversation that we're continuing to have between now and the upcoming NATO summit, but I'm very positive about it. That's what Trudeau said. Okay, so he's pushing it. Of course, this has been the Canadian position for decades, including, of course, Melanie Joly in January of 2022, when there's 100,000 Russian troops on the border. She went there to Kyiv to promote NATO expansion, knowing it would increase the likelihood of the horrors that we've been seeing. And also we have to say that there's the biggest, just to end, there's the biggest Air Force war games that NATO just began. I think mostly in Germany, that of course would be viewed as escalatory from a Russian perspective. So there's more doubling down on NATO, and there's Japan is part of these war games, and of course there's a NATO office setting up in Japan. So further expansion of NATO, and Canada being right at the center of all this. Now, we are very privileged to have from Vienna, and I know it's very late Vienna time, are one of the most dynamic and lucid peace, anti-war, climate activists in the country. Tamara Lorincz, to have her on for this episode. So first of all, thanks for taking the time, Tamara. And I guess my first question is just, I'm going to actually start with just a broad question around the militarism and the forest fires, because obviously these forest fires have gotten tons of attention in the last few days with New York and other American cities, Ottawa, Toronto, being blanketed with smog coming from the forest fires in Quebec, but also all across the country from the east to the west. It's just, it's this may be a sign of what's to come. More and more probably is a sign of what's to come. And to me, the whole question of security, right? We're supposed to be spending all this money on the military for security, but what do fighter jets, what are F-35s, what are submarines, what are these new naval vessels that we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars on? What are they going to do for us to deal with this climate crisis that's increasingly coming at us? And you are one of the only people that's really written about this. So any comments on that dynamic?
Well, Eve, thank you very much for inviting me to speak this evening. It's really nice to be with you all from Vienna. I did speak about the forest fires in Canada and the fact that our country has been investing so much in carbon-intensive militarism over the past decade that has exacerbated the climate emergency and deprived us of the financial resources that we need to deal with the climate crisis and help make communities resilient to be able to deal with these types of natural disasters. While Alberta was on fire with over 100 forest fires and many of them out of control and having declared a state of emergency, the Canadian military was conducting one of its largest live fire training exercises at the Canadian Forces Base Wainwright in southern Alberta. And this was a massive exercise with tanks and with rocket launchers and missile launchers. And these tanks, for instance, have totally damaged the forest, compacted soil, and all of these military bases that we have across the country, about 35, have degraded the forests and have made it more difficult for us to weather these kinds of natural disasters. And it's also important to point out that the Canadian government, has dramatically increased military spending, 70% since 2014. So now we're spending $35 billion on the military, but by contrast, we spend about $2 billion for the Department of Environment and Climate Change, so much less. The other thing to let you all know about is as our Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister, because Chrystia Freeland was also in Kyiv in Ukraine, our Prime Minister gave us a speech in the Ukrainian Rada in the parliament and also announced, this $500 million weapons package. As our Prime Minister is doing that, and I'm in Vienna at this international summit for peace in Ukraine, trying to stop the weapons and stop this conflict. At the same time, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change is having their intersessional 2-week conference on climate change in the lead up to COP28 that's taking place that will be taking place in November in the UAE. So right now, all of the scientists, policymakers, and some of our activists with WILP and other organizations are there in Bonn trying to deal with the climate crisis. And it, for the fact that our government is prolonging this war in Ukraine that is preventing us from having the financial resources and enough political attention to deal with the climate crisis really says a lot about the priorities of our government. So militarism. Oh, and maybe one other thing to say, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, Norway, they brought to this Vienna conference that I'm at this huge elephant float, and it had a banner over it that said, militarism is the elephant in the climate room, and it was big in the front of our conference. So everybody is very concerned about the links between fossil fuel driven militarism and the climate emergency and war.
Well, before getting into a bit more about what you've done in Vienna and the conference, I heard I saw on Twitter that the International Summit for Peace in Ukraine, it was sort of like banned or it was canceled like 48 hours before. Can you just tell us a little bit about that before getting into a bit more substance?
Yes, so there was a lot of controversy around this conference, but I need to preface this by telling you all that this conference was organized by some really good, credible, long-time peace organizations, the International Peace Bureau, the International Fellowship for Reconciliation, Transform Europe, Europe for Peace, Code Pink, many peace organizations that have peace, disarmament, and nonviolence at their core. So they came together to organize this conference, and it was supposed to take place at the Trade Union Hall here in Vienna. Vienna, of course, is known as a city for peace. Austria is a neutral country, and it was scheduled for the Trade Union Hall, but 2 days before, because of pressure from the Embassy of Ukraine, particularly the ambassador here, and there was a lot of adverse media as well about this conference, that the Trade Union Hall decided to cancel the contract, and it left all of the organizers struggling to find another venue. Finally, at the last minute, there was another venue that was found. But that was not the only controversy. The organizers had a press conference to, inform the city and the media about this important summit. Well, shortly after, the Embassy of Ukraine kind of held a press conference calling for the summit to be shut down, and the mainstream media in the country has portrayed this conference very, very negatively, and described some of the speakers in very negative terms. And then we found out today that the International Peace Bureau's website and the conference website called Peace in Vienna have been taken down. So those websites, the last time I checked, are still inaccessible. So there's been a tremendous amount of controversy, and then some activists, human rights activists from countries from Russia, from Belarus, from Ukraine, that are speaking out, who are calling for peace, calling for an end to this conflict. They have also been targeted and ridiculed and vilified. And so that the organizers, many of the speakers, have been under tremendous negative pressure from many different sides. Even the government of Austria has not been very supportive, unfortunately. But despite saying all of that, this conference was extremely important, and I'm so glad I came, and I'm so grateful to the organizers for organizing something that is so needed at this crucial time.
So yeah, this is the same dynamic here. Of course, we're supposedly fighting for democracy in Ukraine, but we have to suppress democratic discussion here in the service of that war that we're supposed to be fighting for democracy. It's also troubling that it was the Trade Union Hall. That's, I think, reflective of here in Canada, where we've had left-wing community centers that have banned events under pressure from Ukrainian Canadian Congress and others. So similar dynamic seems to be playing out. But yeah, so give us a little bit of breakdown of the conference. What was there was obviously lots of speakers, and then also maybe just a bit about like what you personally engaged with.
Well, it was a jam-packed schedule. So I'll begin with Friday. The Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, WILP, they held a 3-hour a women's meeting at the Women's Hall in Vienna. And then that Friday evening, there was a big peace concert, and the peace concert was held to commemorate the birthday of Bertha von Suttner, who is, from Vienna, very famous peace activist, the first woman who won the Nobel Peace Prize, and she wrote an important book at the end of the 19th century called Lay Down Your Arms, and very concerned about the militarization of Europe and very worried about a potential war breaking out in Europe before the First World War, of course. And so there was a concert in her memory. It was really fantastic. And then Saturday, the summit began, and it was a full day until like 8:30 at night. And there were speakers from all over, and there were delegates from all over. So there were about 800 people that were registered in person and online. The venue that we were at could only hold, I think, about 400 people or so. And there were 37 countries represented, and there were people that came from all regions around the world. So there were people from Asia, people from Africa, people from Latin America, and people from all walks of life. There were former diplomats, there were advisors, people from the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and representatives from peace activists across North America and all across Europe. So there was a really incredible mix. And like I said, there were people that came from Russia, from Belarus, from Ukraine, from Georgia. And these are people, like, everybody came to this conference extremely concerned, knowing how dangerous this situation is right now, with this conflict being prolonged and escalated. But people came with an open heart and an open mind, wanting to hear from each other and to try to find solutions. So there were plenaries of high-level speakers, and then there were smaller discussion groups. We were exchanging information and contacts, and there was also a great exchange of things that people are doing in other countries that might be useful for us. So it was just a fabulous exchange of information. That was Saturday. And then on Sunday, again, there were these high-level plenaries and more workshops. And then the conference ended with the Vienna Appeal for Peace and a commitment to meet again by Zoom in a few weeks. And, and a commitment to continue to work together and strengthen our movement and expand the movement. And it was just absolutely fantastic. Maybe to just mention some of the speakers that came, for instance, Dr. Jeffrey Sachs from the United States, Michael von Schellenberger, who is, Schulenberg, who is a former UN diplomat from Germany. He was also the German representative for the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, very senior, former diplomat and Colonel Anne Wright, and of course, a well-known peace activist, Medea Benjamin. But like I said, there were hundreds from all different countries. And it was absolutely fantastic. I learned so much. I came away just more inspired and more empowered. And I have just pages and pages of notes and ideas and resources that I can't wait to bring home to all of you. And I will do a write-up. I've got also lots of pictures that I would like to share on social media. And I guess the biggest takeaway is that we're not alone. What we're doing in Canada, trying to stop this war, we've been working together for the past year and a half, and I'm so proud of all of us, all of the work that we've done to try to put pressure on the Trudeau government to stop what it's doing, to stop sending weapons, to start supporting negotiations. That was the outcome of our Vienna Appeal for Peace, and that's what we've been calling for in Canada. But we are supported by a global community that wants this. We are the global majority. We just got to continue to work together on this. So we have a lot of support. We have a lot of allies. And if you need any contacts in any European country on any of these issues, I've got people's cards, I've got people's email addresses. I'm happy to share that information with you. And we have some Europeans that are going to be coming to Canada soon to support the work that we're doing at home. And it'll be great to hear from them.
Okay, so I'll open it up to questions and comments, and I've made Laura, I've made you co-host. I also just point out, just before getting to the questions comment, there is a tour. Dimitri Lascaris is going to be doing a tour beginning on the 19th, I think 10 cities across the country, about challenging Canada's role in the NATO proxy war and putting forward some suggestions for how to end the horrors. So people can take a look at that. There's 10 cities across the country, so you can check that out. So yeah, go ahead, Laura.
Hi, thanks so much, Tamara, for doing this so late. And I'm just wondering if you could tell us, you mentioned that there were some positive actions about things people are doing there that you found exciting that maybe we could emulate. And I wonder if you could just briefly tell us what a few of those were. And also, could you talk about any points of real key points of contention in the conference between participants and maybe in drafting the final statement?
Yeah, so one thing that I found, well, there's a few things that I found inspiring, some specific examples from different countries. There is this national petition in Germany that has something like 700,000 signatures. Germans don't want their country to be sending weapons and prolonging this war in Ukraine. And so there's this national petition that has got wide support. That was really great to hear about. Also in Italy and in France, of course, there have been, massive protests. So some of the organizers of those protests were at the conference and telling us that people are on the street not only calling for an end to the war, but also calling for an end to NATO. And that, of course, is absolutely vital. NATO plays a principal role in this war. And then there was this really great, I thought I had it here, right here, this really great initiative from the Czech Republic, an appeal. They have a national appeal for peace. A whole bunch of civil society organizations came together and they created this booklet and a national appeal for peace. And they have really been trying to get this to legislators and get this out to the public. And they had some, they had a very prominent activist from the Czech Republic at the conference, and also a very prominent, it was the former foreign minister for the Czech Republic was at this conference, and he's been very behind this initiative in that country to have this appeal for peace. And in the Czech Republic as well, there have been big demonstrations, for instance, in Prague, to stop the war and to stop NATO. So that was really great. The one thing that was a bit contentious was the issue of putting NATO into the final appeal. So there were a few of us who felt like that specifically including NATO was really important to put in the final appeal, but because this causes a lot of controversy for some countries, the organizers decided to be able to get as widespread support for this appeal as possible. NATO was specifically left out, but so many of us at the conference were really pushing on, calling for the end of NATO, the abolition of NATO, to stop NATO. I brought two banners, one huge banner that says abolish NATO. NATO is the greatest threat to peace and security in the world. That's a quote from former president of Bolivia, Evo Morales. So I had this big banner. I had another banner that's pink that says, "No to NATO, yes to peace and cooperation." And I brought with me 200 of these buttons that say, "No to NATO, yes to peace and cooperation," because there were so many Europeans at this conference in particular, and I wanted to be sure that this message of no to NATO was everywhere. And everywhere that I went, I brought these banners. Even I was at the Canadian Embassy today. I had a meeting with one of the political attaches, and outside of the Canadian Embassy, I held up my banner. And even in London, on my way here, I stopped in front of the Canadian Embassy in London, and I held up my banner, "No to NATO." So that was a little bit of the controversy, but honestly, overall, people came together in a unified way to say, we need to stop the killing, ceasefire, negotiations, and an end to this militarism. We need global cooperation to deal with our common challenges.
Gregory, could you please unmute? Okay.
Thank you. Hi, Tamara. Good to see you, and thanks for your great work. Just following up the general feeling in Europe, I saw that Olaf Scholz last week, I believe, was giving a speech, and he was heckled all through the speech by anti-NATO protesters. Would you say that the vast majority of the European population is in opposition to this war, and that people are, I mean, we're not getting very much coverage here in the mainstream media of the dissent that is taking place really globally. But did you get a sense that really there is a groundswell of opposition to the war and to NATO?
Yes. I guess there has been some polling that has been done in some of the European countries that shows that the public is very much opposed to this war. They want the weapons to stop, and they want the negotiations to start. So that was really very encouraging. And I think that's what explains why there has been this shutting down of debate, not just in Austria for this peace conference, but it's been happening, of course, across Europe, and even, of course, in Canada and the United States, deplatforming of events, and the inability of people to get in the peace perspective or the peace voice into the media, and of course, having very little officials, members of parliament, for instance, promoting the peace perspective. So they do recognize that the political elite in Europe is pushing this war, but that the masses are really opposed to it. And it's because they are also suffering economically because of it, with higher inflation, just like we are in Canada. And so, yeah, I would have to look back in my notes to recall, which are the countries that have done some of this polling. But many people felt like there was a growing public support for peace and an end to the war. And then the other thing that I was reminded about was that the global South is very much opposed to this war. So representatives who were coming from Africa and Asia and Latin America, they were saying that their countries are opposed to this, and they wanted to stop. And a lot of the participants at this conference said that it was that what's critical for us is partnering with the global South countries, to help end this war, so that and they reminded us that there are these peace initiatives from countries like Mexico and Brazil, and there were representatives, advisors to President Obrador from Mexico who were at this conference, and Lula sent a statement saying how much he supports this conference, and he's pushing for peace. So the global South countries want this war to end, and they also don't want this to escalate into a war with China. So they want want this to end. So those are our allies. We have lots of allies.
Laurel, can you unmute, please?
Yeah. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Tamara, for telling us about this wonderful event. I'm really impressed by what you're saying. What I'm wondering though is what is your conclusion about the fact that not one Canadian politician has stood up to the Trudeau government and questioned what they're doing with Ukraine? Not one. Not the Greens, not the Liberals, of course, not the NDP, not the Conservatives, not one. They're all silent. Why is that?
I am just so disappointed, and I have been trying to put pressure on members of the NDP and the Green Party to support peace and to help end this conflict. So I'm deeply disappointed, like all of you are. Just before I went to Europe, I was in Ottawa for 5 days, to protest the big arms show CanSec, and I did talk very briefly with the NDP leader Elizabeth May and Alexandra Boulerice from the NDP and the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace and WILP Canada. We have sent letters to the NDP and to our to Elizabeth May, asking for meetings and letting them know that we're opposed to this war. I did ask Elizabeth again for a meeting, a more formal meeting. So hopefully that will come up. But I think that all of our members of parliament are disproportionately influenced by our intelligence services that are so connected to the US intelligence services, always saying that, Russia is a threat, China is a threat. And also they're very influenced by the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, the UCC, which is that federally funded, right-wing Ukrainian group that gets a lot of media attention, and they have a lot of funding, and they are really pushing on our members of parliament. And so it's very difficult for any of our MPs to show any courage to try to resist these influences and say, we need to end the war. Unfortunately, they really should show courage, because there's courage among some of the European leaders. For instance, at this important summit, there were 2 members of the European Parliament. So Claire Daly, who some of you I'm sure know about and follow on Twitter, for instance. If you don't, you should. She's really, really awesome. So Claire Daly, she's been very, very outspoken for a ceasefire and for peace. And the other member of the European Parliament was from Latvia, and her name is Tatiana Zadanokova. And she as well has been calling for an end to the war in Ukraine and for friendly relations with Russia. So we need to see that kind of courage and that kind of leadership that we're seeing by some European parliamentarians, by our own parliamentarians in Canada. But in order for that to happen, it's going to be up to us to put pressure on our MPs. I just want to encourage you to let your member of parliament know about this important conference and that you want this war to end. So, and then let's continue to work together to try to make that happen.
Okay, could you unmute Joan?
Yeah, just before that, Joan, I just wanted to, Tamara mentioning the CanSec. I've meant to, in talking earlier, I meant to mention this. The World Socialist website has an article they posted, I think, early today, titled "Trudeau Visits Kyiv to Bolster U.S.-NATO War on Russia." And in that article, they quote from what the Defense Minister of Ukraine's speech to CANSEC 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago, whenever that was exactly. And it's really kind of remarkable where, first of all, he says how he expects, the word expects, significant more weapons. And then he talks about like when the government's defense policy review is going to come out. Says it's going to come out in July, and they're expecting the stuff in the defense policy review. So anyways, his speech to the sort of like military industrial complex, the arms companies at CANSEC, he's like talking about, basically, it sounds like implying that like Ukraine is like involved in Canada, in formulating Canada's defense policy review. Anyways, I meant to mention it previously, and it just, I think, to me, it kind of highlights just like how the arms industry, I mean, they're laughing at us, right? They see the horrors of all this as really like serving their ends. And it's just a sort of like integration of like the Canadian military, the Ukrainian military, the arms companies, and yeah. But anyways, go ahead, Joan.
Oh, so thank you so much for keep pushing with NATO to be addressed. This reminds me of the peace conference in 1999, the invasion of Yugoslavia. We spent night after night condemning NATO. And I went to a press conference with Cora Weiss, and when she was asked whether they discussed about NATO, she said, no, there was no concern about NATO. And then what happened was NATO used the peace conference to say, the peace conference is not against NATO. So I'm really worried that this is going to happen again. And I'm so glad that you took such a strong stand, well, as you always do on NATO, against NATO. But I don't know why there wasn't something. I think it was just vital, because if NATO keeps going around again saying, well, the peace conference in Vienna did not mention anything about NATO, so they must feel okay about it. I just hope this doesn't happen. That's exactly what happened in 1999.
Okay, we have two more. I don't know if you want to say something, Tamara, but just note that there are two more questions. We have a few minutes left. Catherine Hugh and then Hans Modlik. So go ahead, Tamara. Did you want to respond?
How about we listen? How about we listen to the next two questions, and then I can respond. I have a couple of things to say, but yeah, I don't want to dominate too much.
Okay, Catherine, you're up.
Hi, you're hardly dominating. Thank you so much for all your information, and thank you, Eve, too. I'm just interested in I'm gonna take my video off. It's flashing. Some of the participants at the conference from Africa and other global South countries, and particularly African countries, what are they saying about the effects of this war on economies and people in their countries? Thank you.
Okay, Tamara.
Oh, well, do we want to take Hans as well?
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Hans, and then you can answer both.
Do I come through?
Yes.
Great. If it's any consolation, I remember the anti-war days in the Vietnam era in the 60s. And while, yes, there were a few politicians that stuck their necks out in the NDP, the official party line was just as opposed or just as loyal to the war drive then. I think we should not expect the parliamentarians to lead the way without what we did in the early days of the Vietnam War movement, to have similar conferences like this Vienna conference in our own territory. And, you know, we have centers of gravity, people like yourself, Tamara, Eve, we have Dmitry Laskaris, and let's not forget our academic, Ivan Kachanovsky, a Ukrainian Canadian who has been a source, a manna of information on the background and the reasons for this war. So we have the necessary intellectual power to have such a meaningful conference. And I think, what have we got? At least 100 people on this chat, scattered throughout the land, but nevertheless, I think it's time for us to try to make such a breakthrough conference. It may not be the right time to have massive demonstrations yet, but that was the same picture 60 years ago in the war in Vietnam.
Hans, I could not agree with you more that now is the time for us to start planning a major conference to build up even more our peace movement in the country. It's absolutely crucial, because it's not just trying to end this war in Ukraine, but it's also trying to prevent a war with China. But I want to bring to your attention a few things that I hope answer some of what Hans has said and what Joan has said. So July 8th and 9th is the global peace wave that is being organized by the International Peace Bureau, and it's trying to help build the global peace movement, and it's being held to counter the NATO summit that's going to be taking place in Vilnius on the 11th and 12th. There are going to be some activists that are going to Vilnius in Lithuania to protest NATO, but at the same time as this NATO protest this NATO summit in Vilnius, there are going to be women from across Europe that are going to be converging in Brussels, women against NATO. And if there's any woman in this call, any Canadian woman that has the resources that could represent us in Brussels and join people like Anne Wright, Women Against NATO, that would be really fantastic. We had a meeting a couple of weeks ago by Zoom for the Canadian-wide Peace and Justice Network, because what I'm hoping we can do in Canada to support the global peace wave and to oppose the NATO summit during this period of July 6th to July 12th, that we could have a week of action across the country, stop the war, stop NATO, something to that effect. So we're going to have another organizing meeting, but it would be really great if you could get out onto your streets, in front of your MP's office, in your public square in your town, and have your signs and do an action, stop the war, stop NATO, because we really need to do more action in Canada. And then I also want to bring your attention that the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe is having their Parliamentary Assembly annual meeting in Vancouver from June 30th to July 4th. And I am really hoping that the Vancouver activists will have a rally for peace in front of that meeting, because we need to send a message to the OSCE that really failed us in stopping this war in Ukraine, letting them know that we want peace. So Canada's representative to the OSCE is the Liberal Member of Parliament for Vancouver, Dr. Hedy Fry. And in the lead up to Russia's invasion in February 24th, she was extremely hawkish and escalating the conflict. I was extremely disappointed in how she was acting and some of the things that she was saying, and really it was not in line with the principles and the framework of the OSCE. And what my concern is that the OSCE has been NATO-fied, and we need to reclaim it back, because it is really an important institution that covers all of the European countries, and it brings in Russia. This was our common security. This was the architecture that was going to bring peace in Europe, and the OSCE has failed, and that's because of adverse, disproportionate influence by the United States. And in terms of Africa, there were the African representatives at the conference, they have said that this has exacerbated poverty in their countries because there's less development aid going to the African countries. But they also said that they have strategic empathy for Russia, because during their liberation struggles in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, the Soviet Union was on their side and has shown friendly relations to African countries over many decades. And so they want to be able to regain friendly relations with Russia and with the European countries, and they want to work and support an end to this war in Ukraine. So their voices were very strong and very important. And we have many allies in Africa.
Okay, that's all the questions, Eve. There are no more hands.
So thanks a lot for staying up late Austrian time go ahead.
Well, Eve, can I just share 2 resources with people before I sign off? Because I know you probably have some closing remarks. I want to encourage everybody to get a copy of this book by Jacques Bode called Operation Z, The Hidden Truths of the War in Ukraine Revealed. Jacques Bode is a recently retired colonel in the Swiss military. He is also a senior military intelligence officer. He worked for NATO in Ukraine for many years, and he also worked for the United Nations in peace support operations. And he just very adeptly and authoritatively challenges all of these lies coming from our government. I really encourage you to get this book and to read it and to share it. It's very important. And then I want to go back quickly to one thing that Eve said, and this is Victoria Nuland's speech that she gave in October of 2015. I actually brought a copy with me because I think that this speech that she gave is very revealing and very important, and about the US control of the Ukrainian state after the coup. One of the points that she mentions in 2015 was that the United States supposedly set up an anti-corruption bureau in Ukraine. Friends, 6 months before Russia invaded, in September of 2021, the European Union auditors did an investigation, a comprehensive study. The document, I think, is about 400 pages, into corruption in Ukraine, because they needed to do this audit to determine whether or not Ukraine was ready to join the European Union. So this comprehensive study had to be done. And what the EU auditors found in September of 2021, that Ukraine was plagued with the most severe level of corruption, called grand corruption. Corruption is in every single part of the government, in the executive branch, throughout the bureaucracy, in the judiciary. So Canada and the United States have been claiming that they have been trying to work on anti-corruption reform in Ukraine from 2015. But 6 years later, the country is so corrupt. And remember, friends, the United States has just increased their military budget, a budget that hasn't been audited in 30 years. And many of the people in Europe said to me that the Ukraine war is just another way to wash the money, to launder money from the tax bases in Europe and in North America into the pockets of the military industrial complex and into the pockets of the political elite. So Ukraine is corrupt. This is a fact. despite what the Canadian government is saying. And we just spent another $500 million of our taxpayers for Ukraine to continue to prosecute and prolong this war when we have homeless encampments and forest fires across our country. So friends, we need to work together harder and in a more united way to end this war, to speak out, to have the courage to stand up to our governments and say, this has got to end. We've got allies all over, though. We've got our friends in Europe and around the world. So let's do it.
On that uplifting note, thanks everyone. Thanks, of course, primarily to Tamara. And same place, same time next week. Take care.